Okay, in this lesson, what we're going to talk about is the different types of variables can have, and exactly what exactly that means, and how to inspect a variable's type in there, and then kind of talk about how different variable types interact with each other and sometimes don't. So let's talk about variable types. Okay, so we learned in the previous lesson about what a variable is and how to do that, and how a variable is essentially an assignment of a value that's in memory for us to be able to conjure up and use later on in our Python scripts. And so in this lesson, we're going to talk about what exactly the different types of this are. And we kind of explored it a little bit, like where we created a variable that had a string that said like Chronos. We had a variable that had a number that was the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now let's actually kind of talk about what exactly is a type that's in there. So a type means that it's the type of value for that variable. And one thing that's really interesting about Python is variables can actually change their type, and that's okay. That they're kind of meant to do that, and so let's kind of explore that, and let's look at that and see at what that means here. Okay, so running back to my script here, I'm going to go back to just my basic versions of a username and password. I'm going to print them out like that. Now when I say that a variable type can change, well, let's explore what actually these types are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print something. I'm going to print what's called the type. So username that's in here, right? So this is getting a little bit kind of complicated. I'm printing something. Actually, you know what? Let's do it this way instead, to make it not so kind of confusing here. Username type is equal to type of username in here. So what I've done is I've called a function in here called type. I'm passing it in a variable, and what it's going to do is it's going to spit out and assign to this username type the type, the variable type of what username is. So let's print out that username type. Okay. I'm going to comment this guy out actually like this. We'll talk about how to do this in just a moment. And so all that we're going to see is this print statement and this print statement. Because I've commented this out, this actually doesn't get executed. Again, we'll talk about this in a later lesson. So let's go ahead and clear out my output here, and let's run my Python script. So Python variables.py. So we run that, and now we've got something interesting. We've got Chronos as our username value, which we expected. But now we have this really weird looking thing. We have in between two angled brackets, class, and then str. Well, what that means is that the type of this is a string. So it's a string. We'll talk about what exactly a string means, but a string is essentially a collection of characters that's in there. And so they're strung together. So it's a string. String, you might think of like a string that you have, maybe if you'll remember, like in Christmas, where you have those strings, and you would put maybe popcorn or Cheerios, or my favorite, Fruit Loops, and each one of those kind of individual items in there, but they're all strung together. Well, that's what a string is you're taking a bunch of characters, you're stringing them together. So that's a string type. Let's see what the password type is. So password underscore type is equal to type of password, like this, and we're going to print password type like this. And let's see what comes of this. Oops. Python variables.py. We run this, and now we have int. Oh, what does an int mean? Well, that means integer. I'm going to go back to my slides here and talk about some of the common types of the we have in there. So we have str, which is string, and that's a set of characters that are strung together, like we talked about. Int or integer, it's a numerical value that is a whole number only. So we don't have any like 2.6 or 2.349 or 3.145 something, right? The value of pi. If we need to represent something like that, then we would use what's called a floating point integer, a floating point number. So that's used to represent fractionals. So that 3.14 or 2.2.5. One thing to realize and to understand is that fractions are hard for computers to understand, and therefore they're actually approximations. And we'll explore kind of what exactly that means here in just a minute. Next up, we have lists. Lists are a common sequence type for grouping together objects in a sequential order. And then a dictionary is another common type. And that's a mapping type for grouping other objects with a retrieval using a key. So you might think of like an actual dictionary where you have a word and then it's defined in there. He has a definition in there. Well, a dictionary in Python is something very similar. You have this keyword or a key that then points to this object or value that's in there. We'll talk about those in later lessons, exactly what those are and how to work with them. But those are some very common variable types that might be in there. Let's create some of them and see what those look like. So here's a quick temp dict that's in there. I'm just going to create this again. Don't feel like you need to understand this. I'm just doing this to show to you what happens with this. Now, I am going to comment out the rest of this code just so that we only have this output. So Python variables.py, and ta-da, we see that it's a class dict. So this truly is a dictionary that's in there. I've truly defined a dictionary and assigned it to the variable temp dict that's in there. So, let's talk about floats. Floats are really interesting. I'm going to actually drop into my IPython console. So if you've got Anaconda, you can do this, and it's called, just type in IPython if you got this. If you don't have Anaconda, just type in Python like this. And you'll see and be able to interact with it the same way. It'll just look a little bit differently. So here we go. We've got our IPython shell here. We're going to clear our screen, and then we're going to do something like this. We're going to do 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1. And now we're going to look at an interesting operator, the double equals, which is an equality check. And we'll talk about operators, I think, in the next lesson. What should that equal? 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1, 0.3, right? So if this is true, if we've done our math correctly, and I'm doing this in my head, it should be 0.3. And if that's the case, then this statement should evaluate to true. We'll see what happens. False? What? What? Did my computer break? Is my computer broken? Oh no. Am I gonna have to record this again? Did I do something wrong? Let's see what happens. Plus 0.1 plus 0.1 0.3000004. What? What's going on here? Yeah, you might be a little bit upset, like Kylo Ren, like me. And when you find this, We're going to talk about this later in a different later lesson, and we're going to spend a little bit of time about exactly what's going on here. This is just behavior that's normal for floating point integers because they're actually working with approximations. You don't need to be too worried about it right now. Just understand that this behavior is intrinsic to all floating point integers. And because they're approximations, you aren't going to get exact values and numbers that are in there. Python does try to do a really good job of making it work, but unfortunately, just in the way that it's, and this isn't just Python also, all programming languages, because they're following what is called the IEEE standard and the algorithm that's used to represent that. So it's any type of programming language, C, Java, Rust, Go, all of them. If they follow the IEEE or the IEEE standard, then they run into that. Now let's talk a little bit about some pickiness between how different variables play with each other. For example, let's see what this means when we take our username and our password and try and combine the two together. So what's going to happen when I do this? Username plus password. Now in JavaScript, this will actually work, and you will get something from this. In Python, what will happen? Let's quit out of our terminal, our Python terminal, and let's run our system again. So Python variables.py, gonna run this, and now what? A type error, another error. Well, let's look at this again. What file did we encounter an error? Variables.py. What line is it at? Line 6. So look up here. Oh, yep, line 6. All right, what happens? What type of error is this? Well, it's a type error. And then what is the message? Can only concatenate string, not int, to string. Well, we'll go a little bit later on and talk about the different types of operators and string methods and number operators and number methods that are available to that. But certain types, the thing that you need to take away is that certain types don't play well with each other. And that's the same way with this. Now, we can fix this. We can cast this guy, this, to that. So now we've got username plus string value of password. What does that really do? Well, let's do this. Print str of password. And then even more importantly, let's see, print type str of password. Now, if you remember that the type of password should be int, but what is the type of the str of a password? Well, let's run this and see what happens. And there we go. So we have password printed out as 12345. Looks very similar to what this is. But wait, its type is str. So we've converted this into a string. We've essentially done this, converted it into a string by doing that. So now when we do that, we can concatenate or combine two strings together by using the plus operator. And so that's exactly what we've done. Now we have Chronos 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is typically what JavaScript will do if you've ever worked with JavaScript in that area. Okay. And let's see here. Oh, let's talk about some of the other numerical operations that we have. So let's say my password. You know what? Let's do it this way. Changed password is equal to password plus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Off the top of your head, what value is this going to be? Does anybody know? There's a little trick here. I'll give you 1 extra point if you can guess this right away. Well, nobody jumped through the camera to tell me, so nobody gets an extra point. But if you guessed 6 6s, then you'd be right. You should play around with that. What happens when you do 1 2 3 plus 3 2 1, or 1 2 3 4 plus 4 3 2 1? Let's see what happens with 1 2 3 4 5 plus 5 4 3 2 1. We're gonna print this out, change to password, do some interesting things here, and run this and see what happens. And ta-da, we get 6 6s. Actually, we get 5 6s. I was wrong. I didn't say 6 6s. So marks off for me. That's what we get. 5 6s instead of 6 6s. All right, so we can do some regular numerical operations as well. And here's some other examples. You can multiply. You can do some division. You can do all sorts of different things that's in there. Well, so that's numerical. So that's variable types. We've talked about what exactly is a variable type and kind of how to play around with them, and then also how to check what a variable type is. So if you remember, we were using the print statement or the print function to print out the value of a variable. We use the type function to determine what the type of a variable is. And there's a lot of different types out there. Some of the common ones are strings, integers, floating point values. And then we talked a little bit about how some of those different types don't work well with each other. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about operators and exactly what that is. Hint, we've already been kind of messing around with them. How do we now understand what they all are and how to work with them? Well, that's what we'll do in the next lesson.